Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. I'm glad you're here, especially tonight, especially in this quiet moment, especially if your heart feels full of questions that don't quite have answers yet. There's a particular question that often lingers in the background when you're single. It doesn't always shout. It doesn't always arrive clearly, but it settles in during the still moments, in the pauses, in the silences between texts, in the gaps between weekends, in the heaviness of a quiet room. And that question is this: why am I still single? It's not always said with frustration. Sometimes it's more of a sigh. Why hasn't it happened yet? What am I missing? Is there something I'm not seeing about myself? And then, tucked just beneath that question, softer still, lives a more painful version. Is it me? Maybe you've asked yourself that recently. Maybe you're asking it right now, not in a moment of crisis, but just in a moment of wondering, a kind of tired curiosity, not looking for blame, just looking for meaning. If you have, I want to begin this video by saying something clearly, gently, and with no pressure to immediately believe it. This is not your fault. Being single is not a failure. It is not a punishment. It is not the result of some missing ingredient in who you are. It is an experience, shaped by timing, by context, by culture, by seasons of life. And yes, shaped by you too, but not as a reflection of what you lack. Sometimes we internalize singleness like a diagnosis, as if it says something definitive about our desirability, our capacity for love, or the state of our self-worth. But tonight, I want to offer a different possibility. What if singleness is not a reflection of something broken, but a reflection of something unfolding? Not a mistake to be corrected, but a moment in your story that's quieter, slower, and more layered than you expected. Because here's something we often forget. Singleness is normal. It's a part of the human experience that almost everyone moves through. Not once, but many times. It's common. It's fluctuating. It's not always chosen. And it's not always joyful. But it's also not always shameful. And yet, when you're in it, especially for longer than you imagined, it can start to feel like a statement about your worth, about your likability, about your past, your future, your place in the world. That's not your fault either. We live in a world that glorifies coupling, that sells connection as proof of completeness, and that makes quiet, single nights feel like evidence that you're somehow behind. But the truth is gentler. The truth is, being single might not mean anything about you, except that you're here right now, in a space between. And in that space, there may be room for rest, for reflection, for discovery, for realignment. You're not the only one who has asked these questions. You're not the only one who has felt this pause deeply. You're not the only one who has quietly wondered if you missed your window, or if you're the only one still trying to figure it all out. You're in good company, even if that company is quiet right now. This video isn't going to offer you steps to solve being single. It won't try to turn you into a magnet for love. It won't ask you to love yourself more as a precondition for connection. Instead, it will offer you something deeper, an understanding, a reframing, a slower, more spacious way of looking at this part of your life. A reminder that your singleness doesn't need to be rushed through or quietly judged. It can be explored. It can be witnessed. It can be understood. So take a breath. Let your shoulders settle. There's nothing you need to do right now. No one you need to be. Just listen. Just rest. And if your mind tries to wander back to that question, why am I still single? Maybe tonight, you'll let it be followed by a gentler one. What if this isn't something wrong with me, but something worth understanding more clearly? We'll explore that together. There's a particular thought that often slips into the quiet of a single night. You might not even realize you've had it until you feel its weight. If I were lovable, I wouldn't be alone. It's a quiet conclusion, one that rarely shouts but lingers. It doesn't need to be said out loud to take hold. It moves like fog, soft, slow, settling over everything you try to think clearly about. And because it feels so emotionally true, we often don't question it. It shows up in the stillness of your bedroom, when there's no one to pull you close or whisper goodnight. It surfaces when another person gets engaged and you smile, but feel a subtle ache underneath. It echoes when you scroll through photos of happy couples and wonder, what do they have that I don't? The thought isn't just painful because it implies something is wrong. It's painful because it feels like the only logical explanation. If love is what people receive when they're wanted, then not having love must mean you aren't. But that logic is flawed. Not because you're irrational, but because the emotional brain and the reasoning brain don't always operate in harmony. Here's what's really happening. Your mind is trying to make sense of absence. It's noticing a space where connection could be, and it's looking for meaning in that space. And because the brain doesn't like uncertainty, it fills the gap with something that feels concrete. That something is often self-blame. But here's the truth. That thought, if I were lovable, I wouldn't be alone, isn't a fact. It's an emotional inference. It's your nervous system looking for a source of reassurance and turning that absence into a story about your worth. The reason it hurts so much is because it hits your attachment system. The part of your mind and body designed to seek closeness, to interpret signals of acceptance or rejection, and to scan for signs of belonging. When no signals are coming in, when no texts arrive, when the bed is empty, when no one is there to mirror your presence, that system panics a little. It doesn't just notice the lack, it tries to explain it. And in the absence of external feedback, it starts to source from within. If no one is reaching for me, maybe I'm not worth reaching for. This is a misattribution of cause, a common mental shortcut that humans use when there's ambiguity. When we don't know why something is happening, we assume it must be something we did, or something we are. But love, real, sustaining, healthy love, is not simply distributed to the most deserving. It's not a reward for being good enough. It's not given according to how healed you are, or how pretty or charismatic or together you seem. Love is relational, circumstantial, patterned, timed, messy. And being single doesn't mean you're unloved or unlovable. It means you haven't met the person or people whose life path has overlapped with yours at the right moment, in the right shape, in a way that feels mutual and safe and sustainable. That's not your fault. That's a reality far more complex than anything you could ever reduce to personal failure. But because so much of this happens silently, internally, it's easy to miss how powerful this thought is. It becomes a quiet background noise, a belief that whispers in every experience. If I mattered more, I wouldn't be here alone right now. So let's say it clearly. Being alone is not a character indictment. Your worth is not dependent on someone else choosing you. And your lovability is not on trial just because the world is quiet tonight. You are lovable because you're human, because you care, because you're still here, still reaching for connection, even when it hurts. And if you need a new thought to carry into your next long night, let it be this. I am not alone because I'm unlovable. I am alone because love is rare, timing is tricky, and I'm still on my way, not because I've done something wrong. That may not erase the ache, but it can loosen the blame. And that's where healing begins. It's strange how quickly relationship status becomes more than just a description. How easily it transforms into a story, a statement, a kind of quiet conclusion about who we are. When someone asks, "Are you seeing anyone?" When the holidays roll around and family members gently hint at, "When it's your turn." When all your friends seem to pair off and you're still navigating weekends alone. At some point, being single stops feeling like a situation and starts feeling like a label. One you wear on your chest even when you're not talking about it, even when no one else brings it up. Because now, it's already in your head. And what that label quietly says is this: this means something about me. But where does that meaning come from? Why do so many of us turn an external fact, "I'm single," into an internal judgment? There must be something wrong with me. The answer lies in something most of us never consciously choose, but absorb all the same. Messaging. From a very young age, we are immersed in a world that tells us what it means to be in love, and what it supposedly means if we're not. Look around. Love stories are everywhere, not just in romance films or novels, but in commercials, music, holiday cards, sitcom punchlines, even health insurance ads. The presence of a romantic partner is constantly used as a visual shorthand for happiness, maturity, and stability. What's rarely shown, or shown without sadness, is the image of someone alone, yet fulfilled. Solitary, but not struggling. Quiet, but not lacking. So when you find yourself without a partner, especially for an extended period, you're not just dealing with the absence of connection. You're contending with the implied judgment the world has built around that absence. You start to think, if everyone else has figured this out, why haven't I? If love is what proves you're worth choosing, what does it mean that I haven't been? This is not irrational. It's conditioned. It's the product of a culture that treats romantic success as both normal and necessary, while treating singlehood as a waiting room, or worse, a failure to launch. Even the language betrays us. Terms like "still single," "can't find anyone," or "left on the shelf" imply stagnation, as if being alone is only supposed to be a temporary detour on the road to something better. And in that messaging, a harmful assumption forms. Your relationship status reflects your value. But here's what's real. Your relationship status reflects your circumstances, not your core. It says something about timing, preferences, movement, choice, sometimes even luck. It does not say whether you are worthy of love, capable of connection, or deserving of care. Still, It makes sense that you might forget that in the quiet hours, especially when social mirrors are few. When we're around others, we receive constant feedback, facial expressions, eye contact, affirmations, tiny validations that help us feel seen and real. But when you're single, particularly living alone or spending a lot of time without emotional reflection, something called the mirror gap emerges. The mirror gap is the emotional distance created when no one is reflecting your value back to you. And in that gap, your mind starts to fill in the silence with its own theories. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe I missed my moment. But those thoughts aren't facts. They're attempts to resolve uncertainty. They're emotional noise amplified by a lack of external input. And they're deeply human. We are wired to seek meaning, and in the absence of clarity, we invent stories. Stories that try to explain our pain, even if those stories hurt us further. So if you've internalized your singleness, if you've come to believe it says something bad about who you are, please know that belief was likely shaped by repetition, not reality. It was shaped by messaging you never asked for, by movies that told you love equals arrival, by conversations that assumed a partner is a goal, not a gift, by algorithms that prioritize couple content over nuance, by silence that felt personal, even though it wasn't. And here's the soft correction. You are not behind. You are not lacking. You are not broken. You are in a life chapter that culture doesn't know how to celebrate. But that doesn't make it less real or less valuable. You're allowed to be here, not as someone waiting to be fixed or chosen, but as someone worthy, even in the absence of mirrors. This part of your story doesn't need to prove anything. It just needs to be lived, fully, softly, and without shame. At some point in your life, you may have heard the phrase, "You'll find someone when you're ready." It's often said with kindness, meant to reassure, to soothe, to plant a hopeful seed. But underneath that phrase, and others like it, there's an idea that quietly shapes how we think about love. That relationships are earned. That you deserve love once you become a certain kind of person. That partnership is the prize that comes after a long internal journey of healing, self-work, or improvement. And by extension, if you haven't found love, maybe you just haven't earned it yet. This is the myth of deserving, and it can be one of the most quietly damaging beliefs we carry about relationships. Because it makes singleness feel like a judgment. It turns love into a merit system. It makes loneliness feel like a sentence. And it frames emotional pain as evidence that something inside you isn't good enough yet. You might not even realize you've internalized this belief. It doesn't always show up directly. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper. If I were more healed, maybe I'd be in a relationship. If I were more attractive, more emotionally intelligent, more ready, someone would have chosen me by now. Maybe I haven't done enough work on myself to deserve love. But here's what that belief misses entirely. Love is not a reward. It's not handed out when you finally check off enough internal boxes. It's not waiting at the end of a self-development checklist. It's not something you earn by becoming a perfect version of yourself. Love is a shared experience, not a certificate of worth. And relationships, even healthy ones, are not proof of moral achievement. There are wonderful people who are single, and there are deeply flawed people who are loved fiercely. There are healed people who are alone, and there are messy, chaotic people who are held every night. This isn't because the world is unfair, though it often is. It's because love is not a transaction. It doesn't arrive based on merit. It arrives, when it does, based on timing, proximity, compatibility, openness, and an entire tangle of invisible variables that no one controls. And that means being single isn't evidence of a failure. It's evidence of circumstance. You are not alone because you haven't healed enough. You are not unloved because you're too much, too messy, too intense, or too unfinished. You are simply here, in a moment between connections, in a chapter where no one else's timeline has intersected with yours in the right way yet, in a space where growth is happening, yes, but not as a prerequisite for love, as a part of your life that stands on its own. So when the world tells you, it'll happen when you're ready, try not to hear that as a correction. Hear it, instead, as a misunderstanding. Because readiness doesn't guarantee connection. And connection doesn't always require readiness. Sometimes, two people are just open at the same time. And sometimes, they're not. That's not your fault. That's not something you fix. That's something you navigate, gently, without assigning blame to your own heart. Now, this doesn't mean that personal growth and self-awareness don't matter. They do. They shape the quality of our relationships. They help us navigate closeness, communicate better, choose more wisely. But they do not determine whether love is available to you. They do not make you more deserving. Because love is not a prize for emotional labor. It is not something you unlock when you finally become someone else. It's something that happens between humans, fallible, learning, imperfect humans, who sometimes meet each other at the right time and sometimes don't. So if you're here tonight, feeling like you've failed some invisible test, like you missed the mark on being good enough for love, let me offer you this instead. You were never being tested. You were never supposed to prove anything. You are not waiting to be upgraded. You are not being punished. You are not behind on a race you didn't sign up for. You are becoming. And in that becoming, you are already worthy. Not later. Now. Not when someone chooses you, but simply because you are here, feeling, hoping, continuing. That is enough. And the love that finds you, when it does, will not arrive because you finally pass some hidden exam. It will arrive because love is unpredictable, and you were already enough the whole time. It's strange how quiet the world can feel when you're single, and how loud everyone else's lives seem in comparison. You open your phone, and within 5 minutes, you're looking at smiling couples holding hands in golden light, engagement announcements written in delicate fonts, cozy movie nights under blankets, anniversary tributes filled with inside jokes you'll never fully understand. You weren't looking for these things. They just appeared. And suddenly, without warning, the story in your mind begins to form. Everyone else has someone. Everyone else is moving forward. Everyone else figured this out, and I'm still here. This is the everyone else illusion, the subtle but powerful sense that you are the last one standing alone in a world where everyone else has already been chosen. And it's a very convincing illusion, because it's almost true. It's true that many people are in relationships. It's true that love can feel like it's happening everywhere except in your direction. It's true that some people meet partners easily or early or in ways that seem effortless. But what isn't true, what quietly gets distorted, is the idea that what you're seeing is the whole picture. Because it's not. It's the highlight reel. It's the polished version, the shared version. The version that's easy to digest, easy to celebrate, easy to envy. And in contrast, your reality, which may be more nuanced, more quiet, more in process, starts to feel wrong. Not just different, but deficient. But here's the thing. People post the connection. They rarely post the silence. They post the proposal. They don't post the years of uncertainty. They post the anniversary dinner. They don't post the fights, the doubts, the therapy, the time alone. They don't post the nights they also wondered, what's wrong with me, before things shifted. When you're single, especially in a culture shaped by social media, you're constantly comparing your unedited moments to other people's curated ones. It's not a fair comparison, but your nervous system doesn't know that. All it registers is, they have connection. I don't. What does that mean about me? This illusion is also amplified by something psychologists call the availability heuristic. The idea that we estimate how common something is based on how easily we can recall examples of it. Because romantic content is everywhere, online, in media, in conversation, your brain naturally concludes that everyone is coupled, happy, progressing, and that your experience is rare, or worse, abnormal. But your brain is wrong. Single people are not rare. They are not hidden because they are few. They are hidden because their lives are not always treated as worth spotlighting. There is no Instagram milestone for emotional clarity. There's no TikTok celebration for a night spent peacefully alone. There are no viral videos of people choosing themselves with tenderness and going to bed without apology. But these things happen every day, and they matter. The illusion of everyone else doesn't just distort how you see others. It distorts how you see yourself. It tricks you into thinking your timeline is off, that your growth is slower, that your heart is harder to love. But timelines are not synchronized. Everyone's path has detours, breaks, spirals. Everyone has moments that don't look like progress, but quietly are. So when you catch yourself thinking, everyone else has someone, try to pause and ask gently, do they? Or am I just seeing what's visible? Am I forgetting the invisible stories, the quiet ones like mine? Because you are not the exception. You are not the one person left behind in a world that already found what it was looking for. You are in a moment, a season, a real, valid part of the human experience that isn't glamorous on camera, but is rich with complexity and depth. Your singleness isn't a glitch in the system. It's a chapter that doesn't fit into a square frame with a filter. But it's no less meaningful, no less true, no less worthy of recognition. You are not the only one. You are not forgotten. And everyone else isn't ahead of you. They're just on a different part of the path. Somewhere along the way, being single started to sound like a problem. Not just a life circumstance, but a condition, a situation to monitor, a thing to be worried about, or worse, to fix. You hear it in how people talk. Don't worry, you'll find someone. Have you tried being more open? Maybe you're too picky. Maybe you're not putting yourself out there enough. These comments might seem helpful on the surface, supportive even. But underneath, there's a quiet implication that your singleness is a symptom, that it signals something wrong, that it points to an underlying cause that needs to be uncovered, corrected, managed. But let's pause here, because this is important. Singleness is not a diagnosis. It's not a medical condition. It's not a sign of failure, brokenness, or emotional malfunction. It's not something you catch because of unresolved trauma or poor romantic hygiene. It's a life circumstance, a common one, a shifting one, and for many, a chosen or semi-chosen one, even if it sometimes hurts. We rarely apply this kind of scrutiny to other life moments. We don't assume someone living alone is emotionally damaged. We don't assume someone without kids is developmentally stuck. We don't assume that someone between jobs is morally flawed. But for some reason, singleness becomes a kind of diagnostic category, a red flag, a problem that must be pointing back to you. So you start to search for the reason, not because you're broken, but because the world has made you feel like you must have missed something. You may think, maybe I'm too closed off. Maybe I push people away. Maybe I'm hard to love, and I don't even see it. And to be clear, self-awareness matters. It's okay to ask hard questions about our patterns, our needs, our histories. But asking those questions because you assume you're flawed is different from asking because you're curious. And many people, especially those who've been single for a while, aren't approaching themselves with curiosity. They're approaching themselves like a diagnostic puzzle. That pressure doesn't produce insight. It produces shame. Because shame says, you're not just single. You're single because you're broken, and you're the only one who can't figure out why. But here's what's real. You can be emotionally intelligent, open-hearted, grounded, and still be single. You can be deeply flawed, insecure, avoidant, inconsistent, and still be in a relationship. This isn't about who's better or more ready. It's about context, timing, environment, choices, patterns, values, openness. And yes, sometimes luck. Love doesn't always follow logic, and its absence doesn't always have a root cause. So let's be gentle with the part of you that's been self-diagnosing. The part that reads dating articles late at night, looking for answers. The part that hears a friend say, he's just too emotionally unavailable, and wonders if that's secretly you. The part that listens to podcasts about attachment styles and wonders if your wiring is the reason you're still alone. You're allowed to grow. You're allowed to become more self-aware, more present, more available. But you are not required to pathologize your own loneliness to do so. You are not a diagnosis waiting to be cracked. You are a person with patterns, yes, with preferences, with pain, but also with a pulse, with tenderness, with longing, with light. Your singleness isn't a secret label stamped across your forehead. It's a piece of your current season. It's a room in the house of your life. It's not the whole house, and it's not an emergency. When we stop treating singleness like a malfunction, something softens. We begin to see it for what it is, a landscape with its own weather patterns. Some days bright, some lonely, some full of connection, others quieter, but never an illness, never a flaw. Just a place where growth can happen, where rest can happen, where becoming can happen. So the next time someone, including you, treats your singleness like a sign of something missing, try this quiet reminder. I'm not incomplete. I'm not broken. I'm not under review. I'm simply here, and that's allowed. There's a certain kind of pressure that builds not from other people directly, but from time itself. Maybe you felt it creeping in on birthdays, or during wedding seasons, or when a younger friend gets engaged and you pretend to be fine, but your stomach drops in a way you can't quite explain. This pressure doesn't always have a voice, but it has a weight. It sounds like, I thought I'd be there by now. This wasn't how I pictured my life at this age. Everyone else seems to be hitting their milestones, and I'm still here. This is timeline anxiety, and it's one of the most common, most unspoken forms of stress for people navigating singleness, especially in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. You might not even realize you have it at first. It doesn't always feel like panic. Often, it just feels like shame with a calendar attached, or like being stuck inside an invisible race you never agreed to run. But somehow, everyone else seems to be winning. Where does this pressure come from? In part, it comes from what we've been shown, the blueprint of how life is supposed to go. Meet someone in your early 20s, move in or marry by your late 20s, start a family before 35, grow together, age together, arrive together. This isn't everyone's belief system, of course, but it's still the default script in many cultures. And even if you've never consciously subscribed to it, it can linger in the background, shaping how you interpret your progress, your place in the world, and the pace of your emotional life. And when you fall off script, when the timeline stretches out, loops back, pauses unexpectedly, that's when the emotional deadlines kick in. You start telling yourself, if it doesn't happen by next year, something's wrong. I can't still be single by 35. I should have figured this out already. These deadlines aren't about love. They're about perceived legitimacy. They reflect a fear that there is a shrinking window in which your life can still be seen as valid, desirable, meaningful. But here's the truth, calmly and clearly. There is no right timeline. There is no emotional expiration date. And there is no age by which you're supposed to have arrived. That feeling of running out of time is real. But it's real in the way hunger is real when you smell something warm from the oven. It's a triggered feeling, not always a true one. Because time isn't the enemy. Comparison is. Expectations are. Internalized stories are. You're not behind. You're just in a chapter that's quieter than the ones the world celebrates. There's also another layer to this. Many people who are single for longer than they expected also carry a subtle sense of failure to launch, as if emotional development only happens inside romantic relationships, and the longer you're without one, the more underdeveloped you must be. But that's simply not true. Some of the deepest growth happens outside of relationships, in solitude, in reflection, in the stillness, where no one is influencing your choices but you. If you're single now, and you're feeling that calendar-based fear creep in, try asking yourself, whose timeline is this? Who set this deadline? What happens if it takes longer? What happens if your path is not a straight line, but a spiral? You might find that underneath your fear of being late is a much softer truth. You're not late. You're just learning in real time. You're building a life that doesn't follow templates, and that takes longer but lasts deeper. You're making space for something authentic, not just something on schedule. And yes, that might mean nights that feel quieter than you wanted, mornings that feel slower, moments when you ache for the touch point of someone beside you to mark your progress. But your life is moving, even in its stillness, even in its detours, even in its pauses that aren't really pauses. They're internal reconfigurations. So here's the truth to carry with you tonight. You haven't missed your window. You haven't failed your deadline. You are not emotionally late. You are walking a real path, with real steps in real time. And no calendar can define your readiness, your worth, or the future that still wants to find you. Some growth makes itself known. You move cities, start a new job, make a big change, and everyone sees it, applauds it, names it. Other growth happens quietly, slowly, beneath the surface. It doesn't look like transformation. It looks like existing, like choosing tea over texting someone who doesn't treat you well, like sitting through a lonely evening without numbing it away, like hearing your own voice more clearly, simply because there's no one else around to override it. This is the invisible work of being single, the kind that goes unseen by most, but changes everything. Because when you're single, there is no built-in mirror. There's no constant feedback loop reminding you that you're lovable, that your presence matters, that you are noticed and understood. You have to create those reminders yourself. And that's not easy. It takes emotional labor, the kind no one congratulates you for. You build resilience not by conquering something dramatic, but by waking up every morning in a quiet home and deciding that your day still matters. You build self-regulation by holding your own heart through difficult feelings. Not perfectly, not with instant peace, but with patience. You build identity clarity by making small decisions over and over again. How you spend your evenings, who you let into your life, what silence feels like when you stop running from it. It's not flashy. It's not something you can post about. But it's profound. Because every time you choose to stay with yourself, to stay present in your own life, even when no one else is watching, you are building the inner scaffolding of trust. Visualize it like this. Underground, where no one can see, roots are growing. They don't make noise. They don't bloom yet. But they are stretching, deepening, anchoring, preparing the ground for something stable, something that will last when the wind comes, something that won't fall apart just because it took longer to sprout. That's what the inner work of singleness often looks like. Roots, and roots matter. Because one day, when connection finds you, you'll want to meet it not as someone desperate to be filled, but as someone already rooted in themselves. Not because you were trying to be impressive, not because you were waiting with perfect grace, but because in the quiet, you chose to grow anyway. It's easy to overlook this work when you don't have external validation. You might ask yourself, what do I have to show for this season? What do I say when people ask how I'm doing, and all I have is, I'm still single? But here's what you're doing. You're learning how to hear yourself. You're learning how to soothe yourself. You're learning how to discern which connections feel nourishing and which don't. You're becoming fluent in your own rhythms. That matters. Because the person who learns to sit with themselves, not always comfortably, but willingly, carries a kind of groundedness into future relationships that cannot be rushed or faked. It's not about perfection. It's not about mastering solitude like a badge of honor. It's about noticing that this quiet time is not empty. It is full of the subtle, shape-shifting work that will someday make closeness easier. Not because you'll never struggle again, but because you'll know who you are inside the struggle. So if you're here tonight, wondering if anything is really happening, if this season is just a pause between real-life chapters, let this be your reminder. Something is happening. It just isn't loud. It's root work. It's nervous system work, boundary work, repatterning work, hope maintenance. And none of that shows up on a timeline. None of it fits neatly into a conversation. But it's still growth. You don't have to be visibly thriving to be doing something meaningful. You don't have to have something to show for your nights alone for them to matter. This is not a season of delay. It's a season of depth. And even if no one else sees it, even if no one ever names it out loud, you are still becoming someone stronger, softer, wiser. Someone you might not have met if life had gone faster. Someone real. Someone rooted. There's a moment many people who are single eventually reach. It doesn't always come with tears or a breakdown. Sometimes it just slips in on a quiet evening after another unmatched conversation, or another date that didn't quite land, or a silence that lasted too long. It's the moment when you start wondering, maybe it's me. Not in the gentle, self-reflective way, but in the aching way. Maybe I'm too quiet. Maybe I'm too intense, too complicated, too anxious, too guarded, too picky, too unavailable, too much, not enough. Maybe, and this is the hardest version, maybe I'm just not the kind of person people love. This line of thinking doesn't arrive all at once. It gathers over time. It collects from past rejections, miscommunications, near misses, and slow fades. It comes from watching other people get chosen quickly, while you feel like you're still trying to prove your worth, sometimes to yourself. But what if that conclusion, that you're somehow flawed at your core, is not only incorrect, but rooted in a misunderstanding of how compatibility and attraction actually work? Let's start here. You are not too much. You are not enough. You are a full human being with particular needs, patterns, sensitivities, desires, and layers. You are not a formula that everyone will find easy to digest. But that's not a flaw. That's texture. The belief that you're unlovable as you are often comes from the myth of universal attraction. The idea that if you were truly lovable, everyone would want you. That the right kind of person is magnetic to all. And if you're not being chosen often or quickly, the problem must be you. But attraction doesn't work like that. Attraction is nuanced. Compatibility is layered. People are carrying their own baggage, their own blind spots, their own constraints. And whether or not someone sees you, really sees you, often says more about them than about you. Think about it. Have you ever not clicked with someone amazing? Have you ever seen someone kind, thoughtful, beautiful, and just didn't feel the spark? Did that mean they were unlovable? Of course not. We don't question the worth of others when we don't connect with them. But we almost always question our own when it happens to us. This asymmetry is painful, and it's deeply human, but it's also untrue. Not being chosen by someone or not yet being chosen in a long-term sustaining way does not mean you're the wrong shape. It doesn't mean you need to shrink or round out your edges or perform softness to be palatable. It may simply mean that the people you've encountered so far weren't equipped to meet you, or you them. It may mean the dynamic didn't align, or the timing was off, or they were drawn to versions of intimacy that didn't match your capacity. None of that points to a moral failing on your part, and none of it means you're destined to be alone. Sometimes, the very traits that feel like burdens in dating, your depth, your honesty, your emotional nuance, your slowness to open, are the very things that make love profound once it arrives. But those traits don't always translate easily in a dating culture that rewards instant chemistry, breezy conversations, and quick labels. You're not failing. You're simply complex. And the people who need ease to engage may not be your people. That's okay. You don't need to be for everyone. You need to be for you, in a way that feels anchored, clear, and gently unshakable. The people who value that will meet you where you are, not because you contorted yourself into a more desirable shape, but because they can recognize what you've always been. It takes courage to stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start wondering, "What kind of connections am I actually wired for?" It takes maturity to realize that compatibility is mutual, and that not clicking doesn't make you flawed. So if you're carrying the quiet belief that you're too much, or not enough, or somehow just wrong, pause here with this. You're not wrong. You're real. And being real, fully, deeply, truly, will narrow the field, but it will also deepen it. You don't need everyone to want you. You need the right ones to see you. And to do that, you have to stay visible exactly as you are. Not perfect, just present. We all have a history. Whether it's a few early relationships that didn't last, a series of almost that faded into silence, or deep connections that ended messily. Most people carry a collection of stories behind their singleness. Sometimes those stories feel like lessons, sometimes like wounds, and often they become internal metrics, ways we try to measure how lovable or ready we are. And when enough time passes, when enough patterns start to repeat, it's easy to begin wondering, am I the common denominator? Have I just messed this up too many times? Is my past the reason I'm still alone? It's a heavy thing to hold your own history and not know what to do with it. You may look back on people you hurt, or people who hurt you. You may think about the one who ghosted you after things felt promising, or the one you stayed with too long, even when it wasn't right, or the times you sabotaged closeness because something inside you was scared. And maybe, in a quiet, unspoken way, you've begun to believe your patterns are your fate. That whatever story played out before is bound to repeat. That your past defines your capacity. That if you were really meant for love, you would have figured it out by now. But let's pause here, because this is where the narrative often becomes unnecessarily cruel. Your past is not a verdict. It's a record of moments, choices, circumstances, some that were yours, some that weren't, some that hurt, some that shaped you. But it is not a prophecy. It does not bind you to future outcomes. It does not limit what is still possible for your heart. And it does not make you unworthy of a love you haven't experienced yet. so much of what we call patterns are really adaptations. Ways we protected ourselves, ways we made sense of confusion or pain, ways we tried, sometimes clumsily, to get our needs met. You might have attached too quickly because you feared people would leave. You might have shut down because being vulnerable felt dangerous. You might have ignored red flags because loneliness was louder than your instincts. You might have left too soon because staying felt like losing control. These aren't moral failings. They're responses. Learned, protective, human. And the fact that you're even reflecting on them now means something is already shifting. Because awareness is the start of change. Not perfection, not penance, not proving that you've outgrown every flaw. Just noticing, just staying with the memory without collapsing into it. Just asking, is there a new way forward now that I understand more? You're allowed to have a past. You're allowed to have stories that make you wince. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about the people you once loved, or the people you never got to love the way you wanted. And you're still allowed to move forward. You're still allowed to receive something good. Not as a reward, but because we all get to grow. We all get to change. We all get to build new patterns, even slowly, even shakily. We all get to open doors we once closed out of fear. Your previous chapters don't disqualify you from tenderness. In fact, they may have taught you what real care actually feels like, what safety looks like, what clarity sounds like, what red flags you'll never overlook again, not because you're jaded, but because you've learned. This doesn't mean you have to romanticize the pain. It doesn't mean the breakups or rejections didn't hurt. It doesn't mean you deserve the ghosting, or the breadcrumbing, or the slow unraveling that never got named. It just means you're not frozen in those moments. You're still moving, still forming new understandings, still becoming the kind of person who knows how to offer and receive something real. You don't have to erase your history to be worthy of connection. You just have to keep showing up, not as a perfect version of yourself, but as someone willing to stay curious, kind, and honest with where you are now. That's how new patterns begin. That's how something different becomes possible. When you've been single for a long time, especially if it hasn't been by choice, you can start to feel like something inside you just doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Maybe you've noticed how strong your longing can be, or how quickly hope flickers on when someone shows interest, only to feel crushed when they pull away. Maybe closeness feels confusing, like your mind doesn't know whether to reach out or retreat. Or maybe it feels like you want connection so much, and yet still somehow sabotage it when it gets close. Eventually, the thought forms, something must be wrong with me. My attachment system is broken. But here's the truth, gently and clearly. Your attachment system isn't broken. It's trying to protect you. What you interpret as dysfunction is often just a system working overtime to get your needs met. Safety, belonging, closeness. In a world that hasn't always provided those things in consistent, nourishing ways. Let's step back for a moment and look at what the attachment system actually is. From infancy, humans are wired to seek proximity to caregivers for safety and regulation. That drive doesn't disappear in adulthood. It just shifts toward romantic partners, friendships, and chosen emotional supports. This is not weakness. This is biology. Attachment is what keeps us connected. It's what helps us feel secure in the world. It's what quiets the nervous system and allows us to rest, grow, risk, and love. So when you feel a deep ache for connection, that isn't proof of brokenness. That's a system working as designed, a system scanning your world and saying, where is the person I can co-regulate with? Where is the safety I can rest into? Now, it's true that different people develop different attachment styles, secure, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, based on early and ongoing relational experiences. And it's also true that these patterns can affect how we connect with others. But a pattern is not a permanent state, and a style is not a sentence. You are not stuck. You are not doomed to repeat every past relational loop. And you are not disqualified from love just because your system has learned to be cautious, reactive, or confused in its search for closeness. In fact, the very fact that you're aware of these patterns, that you've named them, explored them, questioned them, means your attachment system is evolving. It's responding to new information. It's learning that closeness doesn't always mean danger. That space doesn't always mean abandonment. That love can be present without requiring constant vigilance. And if you've ever judged yourself for craving connection, especially if you've told yourself, I shouldn't want it this badly, or I need to be okay on my own first, please know this. Longing is not a flaw. It is a signal. A sign that you are capable of intimacy, that you are emotionally alive, that your need for companionship is rooted in something deeper than culture or convenience. It's rooted in being human. There is no shame in wanting closeness. There is no weakness in needing someone. Wanting connection doesn't make you less whole. It means your heart is tuned to others, not because you can't stand alone, but because you understand that we're not meant to all the time. Yes, independence is powerful. And yes, being able to regulate your own nervous system is an incredible skill. But co-regulation, the soothing presence of another, is equally important. And desiring it doesn't make you regressive. It makes you honest. So if your attachment system feels reactive or wounded or tired, that doesn't mean it's malfunctioning. It means it's trying to find safety in the best ways it knows how. And the more gently you meet it, the more compassion you offer when it flares up, the more it will soften. You don't have to fix your entire past to be ready for love. You don't have to graduate from wanting connection. You simply have to remember, your system is working with the tools it was given. And now, you're learning how to update those tools, not by force, but by kindness. Being single doesn't mean you're broken. It means you've had fewer chances to rewire through safe connection. But that rewiring is still possible. It means your nervous system may still be scanning the horizon for safety, and that's okay. You're not behind. You're not defective. You're just human, with a heart that still knows how to reach. And that, in itself, is a sign of strength. You've probably heard it before, the well-meaning phrase offered in support of independence. I'm single by choice. It's often said with pride, or as a shield. And for some people, it's true. But for many others, that sentence doesn't quite fit. Not because they don't value autonomy, but because their singleness doesn't feel entirely chosen. It feels like a mix of things. A timing that hasn't aligned, a pattern that hasn't broken, a fatigue that made them stop trying, or a hope that keeps flickering but hasn't yet found its landing place. They didn't decide to be single. They simply are. And the world doesn't quite know what to do with that. Because we tend to prefer stories with clear agency. We like clean explanations, single by choice, or single and searching, something declarative, something neat. But real life isn't always so binary. Sometimes, being alone is a complex mix of circumstance, healing, fatigue, timing, fear, recovery, curiosity, and just plain life. And sometimes, it doesn't feel empowering. It just feels there. So let's say this clearly. You don't have to love being single for it to be valid. You don't have to wrap it in pride or pretend it was a deliberate move in your life plan. You're allowed to say, I wouldn't have chosen this, but it's where I am. That's not failure. That's not settling. That's honesty. Being alone isn't always a bold declaration of independence. Sometimes it's just reality. But here's the important part. Even when singleness isn't chosen, it doesn't automatically become a problem. It doesn't mean something is wrong. It doesn't mean you're broken or unworthy. It doesn't mean your life is on pause. We confuse discomfort with dysfunction all the time. We assume that if something hurts, it must be a mistake. But pain isn't always a sign of misalignment. Sometimes, it's just the friction of being human in a moment of longing. And that longing, while uncomfortable, is not pathological. It's okay to want someone. It's okay to feel the ache of absence. It's okay to say, I wish I weren't alone right now. And it's also okay if in the next breath, you find something meaningful in the solitude anyway. There's a space between joy and despair, a space where you might not choose being alone, but you're still capable of growing through it. You don't have to celebrate singleness every day to prove that you're whole. You just have to live inside it, honestly, kindly, curiously. Because something happens when we stop fighting where we are. We make room for self-recognition. We stop performing contentment and start asking better questions. What is this space asking of me? What parts of myself do I only hear when the noise of others fades? What am I learning about the kind of connection I want? Not out of desperation, but discernment. Even when singleness is unwanted, it doesn't have to be wasted. There are things that only this season can teach you. About the way you soothe yourself, about the way you move through grief, about how deeply you desire real connection, not as proof of worth, but as a shared experience of being seen. So if you're here, in this moment, not fully at peace with being single, that's okay. There's room for both, for wanting more connection, and for honoring what this current solitude is offering, quietly in the background. You're not wrong for wanting out of this chapter, and you're not weak for learning something while you're in it. Let the nuance be okay. Let the complexity breathe. You don't have to plant a flag in either camp, not the proudly single camp or the desperately searching camp. You're allowed to just be someone in transition, someone becoming, someone listening to their own timing, someone making peace, not out of resignation, but out of a kind of whispered courage. Being alone isn't always a choice, but it doesn't have to be a punishment either. It can just be where you are. And even in its hardest moments, that place is still allowed to hold meaning. There's a quiet reflex many of us develop when we feel lonely. We hide it. Not necessarily on purpose. It's not always a conscious choice. but we soften the edges of our loneliness when we talk about it. We make it sound more manageable than it is. We say, "I'm doing fine," or "I'm just focusing on myself right now." And maybe both are partly true, but under the surface, there's often something heavier. A thud in the chest that comes late at night. A tension in the body when you scroll past another happy couple. A lump in the throat when someone asks, "So are you seeing anyone?" And you have to explain again why the answer is no. And with that heaviness comes something even more painful. Shame. Not just I'm alone, but what does it say about me that I feel so alone? Not just I wish I had someone, but I shouldn't need anyone. I should be stronger than this. Somewhere along the way, many of us got the message that loneliness is a character flaw, that to crave connection, to long for it so deeply that it hurts, means you're somehow less whole, less independent, less emotionally evolved. But let's pause here and name something important. Loneliness is not shameful. It is not weakness. It is not proof that you've failed at life or love. It is not an emotional red flag that needs to be hidden until you've worked on yourself enough. Loneliness is a signal. It's the nervous system's way of saying, "I'm ready for connection." Just like hunger is the body's cue for nourishment, and thirst is the cue for hydration, loneliness is the emotional body's call for closeness. And that's not shameful. That's human. In fact, feeling loneliness is a sign that your attachment system is working, that your body and mind are scanning for the thing we're all wired to need: safety, witness, companionship, co-regulation. It doesn't mean you're needy. It means you're alive. But loneliness becomes tangled in shame when we start to believe that feeling it means we've somehow failed to thrive on our own. You may have told yourself, "If I were stronger, I wouldn't need this. If I loved myself more, I wouldn't feel so empty without someone. If I had done this whole single thing right, I wouldn't be sitting here wishing for someone to hold me." But that's not strength. That's silence wrapped in expectation. Real strength is the ability to honor your loneliness without judging it. To say, "Yes, I want connection. Yes, I feel the ache. And no, that doesn't make me broken." Because there's no award for pretending to be okay. There's no prize for never needing anyone. There's only the slow erosion of truth when you deny what you feel in order to appear strong. And even worse, when you shame yourself for being honest about your need. What if, instead of feeling embarrassed by your loneliness, you saw it as a form of wisdom? What if you understood it as sensitivity? Not the fragile kind, but the kind that stays tuned in, even when the world tells you to turn down the volume. Because this sensitivity is part of what makes you able to love in the first place. It's part of what makes you tender, alert, responsive, emotionally rich. Of course, you feel the lack of connection deeply. That's what allows you to value it when it finally appears. And yes, the feeling of loneliness can be intense, sometimes unbearable. But that intensity is not a reflection of your failure. It's a reflection of your capacity. The capacity to notice absence. The capacity to care. The capacity to feel. So tonight, if you're sitting with that ache, try not to rush past it. Try not to minimize it, or explain it away, or tell yourself to be better than it. Just notice it, name it, offer it kindness. Loneliness isn't always cured by a person. Sometimes it's softened by presence, your own presence. The kind that doesn't scold or shame, but simply says, "Of course I feel this. Of course I want closeness." That's not shameful. That's honest. And honesty is where real healing begins. Not by fixing yourself, but by remembering that loneliness doesn't make you less. It makes you ready. And readiness is not a weakness. It's a sign that your heart still believes connection is possible. And that is something to honor. There's a quiet kind of frustration that builds when you've done the inner work. When you've processed your patterns, healed what you could, learned how to self-regulate, learned to enjoy your own company, or at least tolerate it with grace. You've become more honest, more grounded. You've read the books, listened to the podcasts, maybe even cried through therapy. You've grown in ways the past version of you would be proud of. And still, you're single. Still, the right person hasn't arrived. Still, the text thread ends with, "I'm just not in the right place for something serious." Still, the apps feel like dead ends. Still, the weekends feel long. And somewhere in all of this, a new kind of ache appears. Not the ache of loneliness exactly, but of disconnect. I'm ready. So why isn't it happening? What more am I supposed to do? What's the point of all this growth if it isn't leading anywhere? This is one of the most tender and least talked about parts of singleness. The part where you've done the work and the world doesn't respond. But here's something most people don't realize. Readiness is not a magic spell. It doesn't guarantee arrival. It doesn't summon love like a reward. It doesn't mean the world will suddenly rearrange itself to match your new energy. Because relationships aren't vending machines. They don't appear when you insert the right combination of growth, patience, and self-love. They are the result of many things: timing, proximity, reciprocity, shared values, mutual readiness, and often randomness. You could be ready and still not have met your person. You could be open and still not be seen. You could be whole and still be waiting. That's not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's a reflection of reality. A reality where love is not a transaction, but a crossing of paths. And not all paths cross when you want them to. This disconnect between your internal readiness and the external quiet can feel like betrayal. It can make you question whether your work was real or enough. It can make you want to give up. But maybe this space isn't punishment. Maybe it's a kind of refinement, not of your worth, but of your discernment. A chance to learn how to hold your center, even when the world doesn't immediately validate it. Because part of emotional maturity is learning this. The world won't always reflect back your growth, but that doesn't mean the growth didn't happen. It lives in your breath, in the way you speak to yourself when you're hurting, in the way you walk away from things that once kept you stuck, in the way you choose rest instead of reaching for people who don't meet you. That's real. That's progress, even if there's no one clapping for it. So if you're here tonight, tired of being ready with no one to receive that readiness, take a breath. You are not failing. You are not wasting your time. You are not being overlooked because you did something wrong. You are just living in a world where relationships don't run on fairness, where people's availability doesn't always align with your openness, where the work you've done may not bear fruit immediately, but that doesn't mean it won't. Sometimes, the gap between readiness and connection is longer than expected. But it's not empty. It's filled with practice, with learning to hold your own shape, with finding out that readiness isn't just about receiving love. It's about being able to recognize it when it's real. It's about knowing the difference between attention and resonance, between chemistry and care, between someone who fills a space and someone who builds a life with you. That kind of discernment can't be rushed, and it doesn't always show up with immediate results. But it does prepare you, not for perfection, but for presence. So no, the world may not reflect your readiness right now, but your readiness is still real. And when love finally appears, if and when it does, you'll meet it not from a place of desperation, but from the quiet steadiness of someone who knows their worth is not tied to timing. You'll know that you didn't just wait, you became. And that makes all the difference. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come from loss, at least not in the usual sense. No one died, nothing ended. There's no funeral to attend, no inbox of condolences, no rituals for letting go. And yet, something aches. It's the grief of what didn't happen, of the life you thought you'd be living by now, of the partnership you once expected would have taken shape, of the family, the timeline, the rhythm of adulthood you quietly assumed would unfold. You might feel it on your birthday when another year has passed and the milestones you imagined haven't arrived. You might feel it when you attend a wedding and realize you once thought you'd be the one up there by now. You might feel it when you're doing something good, cooking dinner, watering your plants, folding laundry, and catch yourself thinking, I thought I'd be sharing this with someone. This grief has no clear name, but it's real. It's what psychologists sometimes call disenfranchised grief, sorrow that isn't widely acknowledged or socially supported, because it doesn't come with a headline, and yet it lingers. Because when you build an imagined future, even unconsciously, it begins to take shape inside you. You start designing emotional space around it. You plan your decisions with it in mind. You let it hold a place in your hopes. So when that future doesn't materialize, when it delays, distorts, or disappears entirely, it leaves behind a kind of emptiness. Not because you failed, but because a story ended without ever beginning. And like all grief, this one deserves care. You don't need to feel silly for mourning a life you never lived. You don't need to feel ashamed for missing a partner who never arrived. You don't need to feel dramatic for needing time to release the vision of a future you once clung to. Because grief doesn't only come from what we lose. It also comes from what we expected, from what we built rooms for, only to find them unoccupied. This kind of grief often feels subtle. It might not knock you over. It might live in the background, behind your productivity, your jokes, your optimism. But it still asks to be felt. Because if it isn't, it turns into quiet shame. You start thinking, I should be over this. It wasn't even real. Why am I this sad? Other people have it worse. But that voice, the one telling you to dismiss your sadness, misunderstands what grief really is. Grief is not a comparison. It's not something that requires permission from others to be valid. It's an internal signal that something you cared about, something you pictured, hoped for, waited for, hasn't arrived. And even if you've made peace with where you are, that doesn't erase the ache for what you thought would be. Letting yourself feel that doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest. It means you've loved something, even if that something was an idea. And it means you're brave enough to name that longing, even in a culture that doesn't know how to hold space for it. Because most people don't talk about the grief of non-linear life paths. They don't talk about the mourning that comes with turning 30, 35, 40, and realizing your imagined timeline has rewritten itself in silence. But here, in this quiet place, we will. Because your sadness is not silly. Your longing is not immature. Your ache for a future that hasn't yet come is not indulgent. It's simply a sign that you are human, that you carry dreams, that you're capable of envisioning closeness and of holding yourself through its absence. So let yourself grieve. Let yourself sit with the life you thought you'd have by now. Let yourself miss it and honor it without rushing to replace it. And then, when you're ready, let yourself imagine again. Not because you're clinging, but because even grief holds space for new beginnings. When you give it the tenderness it deserves. This grief, it doesn't define you, but it does shape you. And when you feel it fully, without shame, it becomes less of a weight and more of a doorway. There's a particular sting that comes with rejection, even the quiet kind. Sometimes it's loud. The person you were excited about suddenly says, "I don't see this going anywhere." Or someone ghosts, pulling away with no explanation. Other times, it's subtle. You sense disinterest. A text dries up. A tone shifts. It doesn't always come with a reason. But the silence, the pullback, the mismatch, it still lands hard. And when it happens more than once, when the endings start to blur together, it's easy to feel the rejection, not just as a response to a moment, but as a reflection of your whole self. That's when blame starts to creep in. Maybe I was too much. Maybe I'm just not attractive enough. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I'm just bad at this. Rejection can be so quiet and so personal that it feels like a mirror, one reflecting back every insecurity you've ever had. But let's slow that down, because rejection does not always mean what you think it does. In fact, much of the time, rejection has more to do with the other person's landscape, their fears, their limits, their timing, their clarity, than it does with your worth. This is hard to accept, especially when you've been craving connection, hoping for something real, and trying to show up authentically. When you've risked even a little, and someone doesn't meet you there, it's natural to assume, if I were different, this wouldn't have happened. But the truth is, rejection is rarely that simple. Let's explore a few reasons someone might not move forward that have nothing to do with your value. They're not emotionally available and know it on some level. They felt a spark, but their nervous system confused it with fear or discomfort. They're still attached to someone else, even unconsciously. They liked you, but their capacity for intimacy is low right now. They're afraid of being seen and sensed you'd see them deeply. The timing genuinely doesn't align, logistically, emotionally, or both. They're stuck in a pattern of chase/retreat, and you didn't play the expected role. In each of these cases, rejection may still hurt, but it's not about you. It's about dynamics, about internal limits, about misalignment that would have caused more harm if ignored. This doesn't mean you've never contributed to the disconnect. We all bring things into relationships, hopes, fears, behaviors we're still unlearning. But even when you make mistakes, those mistakes are not proofs of unworthiness. They're part of being real, part of learning, part of trying. Blame says, "It's my fault this didn't work." Growth says, "It didn't work, and maybe I can learn something," without shaming myself. One constricts you, the other expands you. You're allowed to feel sad when something doesn't land. You're allowed to replay moments, to wonder. But you are not required to carry the entire emotional cost of the rejection alone. Because here's the deeper truth. Rejection is part of connection. It's not a detour. It's part of the map. To move toward others with openness means occasionally hitting friction, misalignment, or someone else's unreadiness. That doesn't mean your offering was flawed. It just means connection is mutual, and you can only offer your half. When you stop tying rejection to personal inadequacy, something softens. You stop editing yourself into a more acceptable version. You stop performing a smaller, shinier self to reduce your risk. You start showing up as you, messy, honest, clear. And while that might not reduce rejection entirely, it does change what rejection means. It becomes information, not indictment. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Was this space ever really right for me?" That shift from blame to curiosity is everything, because rejection will happen. But it doesn't need to echo through your identity. It doesn't need to confirm your worst fears. It doesn't need to narrate your worth. It can just be a closed door. Not because you weren't good, but because that room wasn't yours. And somewhere there are people, connections, who will meet you in the full depth of who you are, who will say yes, not because you performed your way into their lives, but because your presence made them feel safe, seen, and ready. And the rejections along the way, they didn't break you. They clarified you. There's a moment, and if you've been single long enough, you probably know it well, when the absence of someone beside you doesn't just feel like absence. It starts to feel like evidence. Evidence that something is off. Evidence that maybe you are not meant to be loved. Evidence that maybe no one will ever really choose you. It doesn't always come as a dramatic thought. It might just show up as a quiet whisper on a Thursday night, or a heaviness in your chest when you see someone else being held, or a pause after brushing your teeth, looking in the mirror, wondering why it still hasn't happened for you. This is where many people quietly and painfully blur the line between aloneness and unlovability. They aren't the same, but over time, they can start to feel indistinguishable. So let's gently untangle that. Let's begin here. Being alone is a state. It describes your current circumstance. It's where you are, not who you are. Feeling unlovable is a belief. It's an interpretation, a conclusion your mind reaches when it's trying to make sense of why you're still alone, especially when it hurts. But here's what your mind doesn't always get right. Just because something is happening or not happening in your life doesn't mean it's a reflection of your value. This is one of the most painful distortions we make as humans. We take absence personally. We think, if love is missing, it must be because I'm missing something too. But love is not a prize for perfection. It doesn't arrive when you finally earned it. It It doesn't skip you because you're flawed. The space where a relationship hasn't landed is not a measurement of how worthy you are to be loved. It's just space. Hard space, yes. But still, space. And space is not shameful. If you need a visual, imagine this. A candle in a dark room. The room is empty. There's no one sitting beside it. No voices echoing in the space. No applause. But the candle is still lit. Its warmth still exists. Its light still flickers. Its flame still matters. Even if no one's there to see it. That's you. Still here. Still warm. Still lovable. Even when no one is reflecting it back. Aloneness doesn't erase your capacity to love. It doesn't dull your empathy, your humor, your insight, your depth. It doesn't mean your presence isn't longed for somewhere by someone who hasn't yet crossed your path. It just means that right now, the mirror is quiet. And when mirrors are quiet, we have to do the harder thing. We have to remember who we are without constant reflection. That's not easy. Especially when love feels like a hunger you've been trying not to name too loudly. But this is where the distinction matters most. You can be in a season of aloneness, even a long one, and still be entirely, completely, profoundly lovable. You can be lovable and unseen. You can be lovable and unchosen. You can be lovable and in the middle of becoming. Because lovability is not something you earn. It's not conditional. It's not a pass/fail test based on how many people have held your heart. It is inherent. It is quiet. And sometimes, it lives silently inside you for a long time before someone else says, "Yes, I see it too." But their seeing it doesn't make it real. It was always real. So if you're here tonight, carrying the weight of that question, am I unlovable? Take this in gently. You are not unlovable. You are just between mirrors, and the flame in you still burns. Whether or not someone has cupped their hands around it yet, whether or not someone has leaned in to feel its warmth, you are still lovable. Not later. Not when you're partnered. Not when you're healed. Not when someone else decides you are. Now. Still. Always. There's a story that floats just beneath the surface of many modern conversations about healing and relationships. You'll hear it in self-help books. You'll hear it in podcasts and therapy circles. You'll hear it in quiet, polished tones meant to sound empowering. The story goes like this. You have to love yourself before anyone else can. Heal your wounds first, then you'll attract the right person. Do the work, otherwise, you'll only repeat your patterns. On the surface, this sounds wise. And to be fair, it comes from a well-intentioned place, a desire to help people build stronger, more conscious relationships. But here's the problem. This narrative quietly turns healing into a precondition for love. It makes growth sound like a gate you must pass through before connection is allowed. It subtly suggests that if love hasn't happened yet, it's because you haven't done enough work. And that can create an exhausting loop. One where you're not just navigating your singleness, but constantly wondering, what's still wrong with me? What haven't I healed yet? Am I still single because I haven't fixed myself enough? Let's pause here, because this is where clarity matters. Yes, self-awareness helps relationships. Yes, healing can reduce unnecessary harm. Yes, personal growth gives you tools to show up with more compassion and honesty. But you are not required to become some final, polished version of yourself before love is allowed to reach you. Love isn't a reward for perfection. It's not a gold star you get when you've proven your emotional literacy. It's not reserved for people with ideal attachment styles, flawless boundaries, and no more fears left to name. You're allowed to want love now, with your questions, with your leftover grief, with your inconsistent confidence, with your not quite healed heart. That longing, it's not a signal that you're incomplete. It's a signal that you're human, wired for connection, wired for witness. You can be in process and still be ready for love. You can be uncertain and still be worth choosing. You can be healing inside a relationship, not just before one. Some wounds aren't meant to be solved in solitude. They're meant to be soothed in the presence of someone safe. Someone who doesn't rescue you, but who sits with you while you learn how to rescue yourself. So when you hear that voice, the one that says, "You need to fix this before you can be loved," try asking it gently. Who taught me that love has to be earned through perfection? Where did I learn that I had to prove my worth by hurting less? Because love, real love, isn't scared of your edges. It's not deterred by your sadness, or your silence, or your mess. It might not solve everything, but it can meet you as you are and walk beside you while you keep becoming. The idea that you must be fully healed to deserve love often masks a deeper fear. The fear that your broken parts will make someone leave, that your pain will scare them off, that your process will be too much. But here's the truth most people don't say out loud. We all have something. We all carry losses, blind spots, triggers, fears. We all stumble sometimes when we try to let someone in. We all, even the ones in long relationships, are still learning how to love better. So you don't have to delay your desire. You don't have to apologize for wanting closeness before you've crossed every emotional finish line. You're allowed to be a work in progress. You're allowed to show up with your history, not as baggage, but as story. You're allowed to want love now, not later, not once you're better, because you are not a problem to be solved. You are a person, longing, learning, reaching. And if someone meets you in that place, not to fix you, but to walk with you, that's not a mistake. That's love doing what it's meant to do. When you've been single for a while, especially when it hasn't felt entirely like a choice, it's easy to assume that the silence means something bad, that the absence of a partner means you're not doing life right, that the stillness in your love life must be a sign of failure, unworthiness, or bad timing, that something is off, missing, or misaligned. And in that space, it's easy to start asking the same questions over and over. Why not me? What am I doing wrong? When will it be my turn? But what if the silence isn't shame? What if the stillness isn't punishment? What if being single, especially right now in this season, is saying something different? Something that has nothing to do with your flaws and everything to do with your unfolding. Let's explore this idea gently, because sometimes when life feels like it's withholding something, it's not withholding out of cruelty, it's making space. Space you wouldn't have otherwise made. Space that's not empty, but pregnant with something you haven't yet named. That space may be whispering things like, you needed this time to come home to yourself. You were about to settle for something that didn't fit you. You've been everyone else's emotional anchor, This is your season to be your own. Your heart still needed rest, even if your mind thought you were ready. You're building clarity now so that later, when love arrives, it's built on truth, not longing alone. But those whispers are easy to miss when all we're listening for is love's arrival, because we're conditioned to see singleness as a gap, an in-between, a pause that doesn't matter. But singleness is not just an absence, it's a presence of its own. And that presence might be communicating something important, not about what's wrong, but about what's right for you at this exact moment in time. Maybe this season is asking you to hear your own voice more clearly, reclaim energy you've given away for years, identify what you actually want, not what you were taught to want. Heal your relationship with your body, your time, your purpose. Learn that intimacy doesn't just come from romance, but from learning to trust yourself again. These aren't filler tasks. They're not the emotional equivalent of busy work until real life begins. They are the work. And often, it's only in solitude that we can actually hear these deeper invitations. Because when you're partnered, your energy naturally orients around that bond. That's not a bad thing. It's just true. Relationship brings beauty and co-creation, but it also takes up space. And right now, you have space. Not because something failed, but because something else is unfolding. So what if, instead of assuming singleness means you're behind, you asked, what is this season preparing me for? Not in a forced, everything happens for a reason way, but in a softer, slower way. A way that allows singleness to be more than just waiting. Because when we shift our posture from panic to listening, something changes. We stop trying to escape the moment. We start asking what it might be offering. And sometimes, what it offers is simply clarity. The clarity to recognize patterns you don't want to repeat. The clarity to say no faster. The clarity to feel attraction and not follow it if it comes from the wrong place. The clarity to feel your own pacing instead of rushing into connection just to ease the quiet. This doesn't mean you have to love being single. It doesn't mean you can't want partnership. It just means there may be wisdom inside this experience that's worth hearing, if only for a moment. So tonight, instead of asking, why hasn't love come yet? Try asking, what is this moment asking me to notice? What do I know now that I didn't know a year ago? What do I trust about myself that I didn't before? You might find that singleness hasn't been silence after all. It's been a quiet teacher, and its lessons, while hard-earned, might be preparing you for something deeper than just love. They might be preparing you for you. Stillness doesn't always feel like peace. Sometimes it feels like discomfort wrapped in silence, like a room that holds its breath, like time stretching out in front of you with no clear shape. When you're single, and especially when nights are long or plans fall through, or a weekend feels empty, stillness can feel less like rest and more like confrontation. Like everything you've managed to distract yourself from during the day has waited until now to sit down beside you. In those moments, it's easy to think, I need to do something. I need to fix this. I need to change something, now. But maybe what you're feeling isn't something broken. Maybe it's just presence. And maybe presence takes more courage than we usually admit. Because we live in a world that encourages movement over meaning. That says progress is measured by activity, not by capacity. That tells us to optimize, improve, hustle, grow. And yet, here you are, in a space where nothing is demanding your immediate attention. No partner to cater to, no relational crisis to solve, no constant feedback loop of validation and response. Just you. And that, strangely enough, might be one of the bravest things you ever face. Because stillness asks you to be with yourself, not the version you show to others, but the one who lingers underneath, the one who feels tired without knowing why, the one who still carries stories no one else knows, the one who wants love so badly some nights it makes your chest ache. And in that stillness, you are not performing, you are not distracting, you are simply here. And being here, fully, honestly, patiently, is an act of quiet courage. Not everyone is willing to do that. Not everyone can. It's easier to rush towards someone, anyone. It's easier to swipe, scroll, numb, text. It's easier to perform stability than to sit inside the unstructured moment and say, I am enough, even now. But the truth is, stillness is not a failure of momentum. It's a test of relationship, not with others, but with yourself. When there's no one else to mirror you, when the apartment is quiet, when your phone isn't lighting up with affection or plans, that's when the real work begins. That's when your inner voice gets louder. That's when the patterns surface. That's when your self-soothing mechanisms, or lack of them, reveal themselves. And instead of trying to escape that moment, what if you honored it? What if you said, this stillness is showing me something I need to know? What if you saw your ability to sit inside the quiet, to feel without fleeing, as a form of strength? Because it is. It's not the kind of strength that earns applause. It's not the kind that gets posted on social media. It's the kind that builds something deeper. It's the strength of someone who doesn't abandon themselves in their own company. The strength of someone who doesn't treat loneliness as failure. The strength of someone who can feel uncomfortable and stay. This doesn't mean you have to like every quiet evening. It doesn't mean you have to romanticize solitude. It just means that not running is a form of resilience. It means that not reaching for the wrong person just to fill the space, that's wisdom. It means that not performing your way out of the moment is integrity. You're not doing nothing in the stillness. You're doing something extraordinary. You're saying, I am here. I am whole. I am listening. Even when it's hard, even when it's boring, even when it aches. And that kind of presence, unglamorous as it may be, is the foundation of self-trust. It's the thing that stays with you when everything else falls away. It's the thing that prepares you to love from stability, not scarcity. It's the thing that says, even before someone else chooses me, I have already chosen myself. So the next time stillness visits you, not as peace, but as pause, remember, you're not stuck, you're not behind, you're not broken. You're becoming. And becoming takes space. Becoming takes quiet. Becoming takes courage. And you're showing that courage moment by moment, just by staying. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't always speak in words. It shows up when you watch someone announce their engagement online. It shows up when your younger cousin introduces their partner, the one they met 6 months ago and are already moving in with. It shows up when the group text starts filling with baby pictures, or joint mortgage updates, or anniversary dinners you weren't invited to. It's not bitterness. It's not jealousy exactly. It's something quieter, something heavier. It's the creeping fear that somehow you've been left behind, that everyone else got the map, that everyone else is checking the boxes, reaching the milestones, moving forward. And you're still here, still going to weddings alone, still answering questions with, no, not seeing anyone right now, still waiting for a moment that hasn't arrived. It's easy in those moments to feel like time is passing without you, like the rhythm of life skipped over your house, like you're late to a party where the doors quietly close behind everyone else. But let's pause. Let's breathe. Let's say this clearly, for your heart, not just your head. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not off track. You are not living some secondary, less valuable version of adulthood. You are on your timeline. And your timeline doesn't have to look like anyone else's to be valid. Our culture loves the illusion of linearity. It tells us that by 25 we should be partnered. By 30 we should be settled. By 35 we should have built something permanent. But these markers are not truths. They're patterns. And patterns are not mandates. Your life is not late because it unfolds differently. You're not behind because love hasn't arrived on someone else's schedule. Behind what? Behind whom? By whose clock? Your path is not meant to be a copy of someone else's, and your worth is not diminished just because you're moving through it at a different pace. Sometimes, the most important things in your life don't come when you expect them to. They come when you're ready, in ways you couldn't have predicted, through seasons you never saw coming. And that readiness, it's not always visible to others. It's not something you can post about or explain at family gatherings. But it's there. It's in the way you've learned to sit with yourself. It's in the boundaries you now hold. It's in the clarity you've fought for. It's in the strength you've built by being your own witness, your own mirror, your own home. You may not have a partner right now, but you have something many people never learn. The ability to belong to yourself. That's not a detour. That's a foundation. And if love comes again, it will land on solid ground. Not because you rushed, not because you hustled to catch up, but because you stayed with your life, even when it looked different than you imagined. This doesn't mean the ache disappears. It doesn't mean every wedding toast will feel easy to listen to. It doesn't mean you'll stop wondering, some nights, how things might have been. But it does mean you can hold the ache without believing the lie. The lie that you failed. The lie that you're behind. The lie that life is happening to everyone else, while you wait on the sidelines. You're not on the sidelines. You're in it. You're becoming. You're growing in the quiet, in the questions, in the space where comparison once shouted. And the people who are ahead, they're not ahead. They're just walking a different path. Their joy doesn't mean your joy won't come. Their timing doesn't disprove yours. Their milestones don't erase the value of what you're learning in this exact moment. So take this with you tonight. You are not a failed timeline. You're a living, breathing, beautifully non-linear journey. And your worth has never been tied to speed. You are not behind. You are simply where you are. And where you are is still sacred, still unfolding, still enough. And now we've arrived at the end of this quiet arc, A journey through thoughts you may not have spoken out loud, but have almost certainly felt. A journey that wasn't about fixing anything or rushing you to feel better, but about staying long enough to notice. You were never broken. You were never behind. And being single, this part of your life, is not a placeholder. It's a chapter, a real one, a whole one, not a waiting room, not a footnote, not a blank space before the real story begins. Singleness carries meaning, deep, quiet, and often unacknowledged meaning. And not because you force it to, not because you decide to make the most of it, but because your life is meaningful, regardless of who stands beside you. You are not in between. You are not paused. You are not unfinished. You are in motion. You are becoming. You are alive in the world. This part of your story is full of real days, real growth, real reflection. It's full of conversations, decisions, rhythms, insights, and emotional strength you've built in silence. And maybe no one saw it. Maybe no one gave you credit for it. But you did it anyway. You stayed through the nights that felt heavy. You comforted yourself when reassurance didn't come. You moved forward, even when forward felt slow. And that matters. This doesn't mean you have to pretend you love being single. It doesn't mean you shouldn't want partnership, or wish for closeness, or hope for someone to share life with. It just means your life is not empty without those things. It means the shape of your love doesn't have to be proven by the presence of a partner. It already exists in how you care for your friends, in how you learn from your past, in how you soothe yourself after a long day, in how you stay open, even after being hurt. The tenderness you carry, that's love. The clarity you've earned, that's love. The way you hold space for yourself in the middle of not knowing what comes next, that's love. So maybe tonight, instead of wondering what's missing, you can pause and ask what's here. Not because you're trying to convince yourself it's enough, but because it already might be, in small, quiet, powerful ways. Singleness is not a deficit. It is not a problem to solve. It is not a space you must justify with productivity, spiritual growth, or fierce independence. It is simply a part of life, valid, rich, and deserving of presence. And what it means is up to you. You can let it be soft. You can let it be uncertain. You can let it hold both grief and grace. You can let it teach you things you didn't know you needed to learn. You can let it count. And if someone else shows up someday, not to complete you, but to walk beside you, you'll know how to meet them. Not from a place of desperation, not to be saved, but because you already learned how to stand, how to listen, how to live fully, alone. Not forever, not necessarily, but long enough to know that your story, with or without another, is real, is meaningful, is whole. So wherever you are right now, in a quiet room, beneath soft blankets, or sitting with your thoughts just before sleep, know this: you are not lacking. You are not waiting to begin. You are not the only one who's ever felt like this. You are part of something universal and deeply human. And your singleness, it isn't small. It is part of your becoming. And you, dear one, exactly as you are already enough.